In the early years of the 19th century, long before highways cut across America, before electric lights filled the night sky, and before hospitals stood on every corner, there existed a quiet town resting beside the mighty Mississippi River. The river flowed like a living creature, wide and powerful, carrying boats, cotton, dreams, and sometimes tragedy. Its waters reflected the burning southern sun during the day and shimmered like silver beneath moonlight at night. This small town had no grand name. It was known only to traders, farmers, and plantation owners who depended on the river for survival. To outsiders, it looked peaceful. Wooden houses lined dusty roads. Tall oak trees offered shade in the brutal summer heat. Horses pulled wagons slowly through the streets. Church bells rang every Sunday morning. From a distance, it seemed like a place untouched by trouble. But beneath this calm surface, a harsh reality existed. This town was built on slavery. Every brick, every road, every cotton bale carried the silent suffering of enslaved black men, women, and children. They lived in narrow wooden cabins behind the large plantation homes. Their days began before sunrise and ended long after sunset. They worked in fields under crushing heat, their backs bent, their hands bleeding, their spirits tested every day. Among them was a man named Elijah. Elijah had been born into slavery. He never knew freedom. His earliest memories were of his mother waking him before dawn, whispering prayers, and tying cloth around his small feet so they would not blister in the fields. He remembered his father being taken away to another plantation and never returning. Like many enslaved children, Elijah learned early that life was uncertain and cruel. Yet something inside him remained gentle. Even as a boy, Elijah noticed pain in others. When someone collapsed in the field, he was the first to bring water. When elders coughed through cold nights, he sat beside them. When children cried from hunger, he shared what little food he had. He did not do this for praise. He did it because he believed suffering should never be faced alone. By the time Elijah reached his 30s, he had become one of the most trusted people in the community. Plantation owners noticed that workers performed better when Elijah was nearby. He kept people calm. He prevented fights. He helped injured workers heal faster. So they assigned him small responsibilities. He carried supplies. He helped oversee sick workers. He was allowed to move between plantations more freely than most enslaved people. Not because he was respected as a human being, but because he was useful. Still, Elijah never abused this small privilege. He used it to help others. Life in the town followed strict routines. At sunrise, bells rang from plantations. Workers marched into fields. Overseers rode horses carrying whips. Women prepared meals over open fires. Children gathered water from wells. By midday, the heat became unbearable. Sweat-soaked clothes, dust-filled lungs, insects buzzed endlessly. Yet work never stopped. In the evenings, when darkness finally softened the sky, enslaved families gathered outside their cabins. They sang quiet songs. They told stories passed down from Africa. They whispered about freedom like it was a distant dream. Meanwhile, inside the plantation houses, white families lived differently. They ate large meals, they wore clean clothes, they discussed business and politics. They believed their comfort was normal, that their power was deserved. Very few questioned the system. Despite this injustice, the town had its rhythms. Sundays were different. On Sundays, work slowed. People dressed in their best clothes, churches filled with prayers. For a few hours, everyone pretended life was fair. Elijah often stood outside the church, helping elderly people walk. He listened to sermons about kindness and mercy, wondering why those words never reached the fields. Still, he held on to hope, because hope was all he had. During that particular summer, the year the fever would arrive, the town felt unusually peaceful. The river was busy with boats, cotton prices were rising, plantation owners were making money, crops were healthy. People believed good times would last forever. No one prepared for disaster. Far away, in crowded port cities, something invisible was spreading, a deadly fever. It arrived quietly, on ships and cargo and travelers and mosquitoes. No one knew exactly how. All they knew was this: people were dying. Fast. Newspapers in distant cities wrote about burning skin, violent coughing, yellow eyes, black vomit, sudden death. Doctors argued, priests prayed, governments failed. But in Elijah's town, these reports felt unreal. They exaggerate, people said. It won't reach us. We live in the countryside. We are protected. They were wrong. One evening, Elijah was unloading sacks of grain near the river when he overheard two traders talking. 3 towns downriver are gone, one said. Gone, the other replied. Half dead, half fled. Elijah froze. From what? Someone asked. Fever, the man answered quietly. A killing fever. That night Elijah could not sleep. He sat outside his cabin, watching the stars, listening to insects, feeling a strange heaviness in his chest. Something was coming. He could feel it. Days passed. Nothing happened. People relaxed again, but Elijah remained alert. He began quietly collecting herbs. He cleaned old blankets. He prepared small water containers. No one told him to do this. He followed instinct. Then one morning the birds were silent. A boy collapsed in the marketplace. The fever had arrived. Before anyone realized what was happening, sickness spread through the town like wildfire. Houses closed their doors. Coughing echoed through streets. Funerals multiplied. Fear took over. And Elijah's world changed forever. The morning after the young boy collapsed in the marketplace, the town woke up to an uneasy silence. Usually at sunrise, the streets filled with the sound of footsteps, wagon wheels, and distant voices. But that day, everything felt slower, heavier, as if the air itself was afraid to move. People opened their doors carefully, looking left and right before stepping outside. Whispers replaced laughter. Worry replaced routine. No one said it out loud yet, but deep inside, everyone felt the same fear. Something terrible had begun. By noon, news had spread that the boy had died during the night. His fever had risen so high that his body burned like fire. He had cried for water until his voice disappeared. His mother had held his hand until it went cold. The town's small doctor had tried bleeding him, giving bitter medicines, and praying over him, but nothing worked. Death had taken him quickly and without mercy. His body was wrapped in cloth and buried before sunset. Without ceremony, without comfort, without time for goodbyes, Elijah stood at a distance during the burial. He watched the mother collapse onto the ground. He saw neighbors hesitate before touching her, afraid they might catch the sickness. He felt anger and sadness twist inside his chest. For the first time in his life, he realized that fear could make people abandon even love. That realization stayed with him. 2 days later, another person fell sick. Then another. Then 3 more. Fever spread from house to house like invisible fire. People who had been healthy in the morning were shaking and delirious by night. Children vomited until they had nothing left. Strong men cried like infants. Women begged God for mercy that never seemed to come. Doctors were overwhelmed. There were only 2 trained physicians in the town, and both were unprepared for something like this. They worked without rest, moving from bed to bed, trying old methods that had failed elsewhere. They bled patients, believing it would release sickness. They burned incense to cleanse air. They mixed herbs and alcohol. But death continued. Rumors spread faster than truth. Some said the fever was carried by demons. Others claimed poisoned water. Some blamed enslaved people. Some blamed immigrants. Fear turned neighbors into enemies. Trust disappeared. Suspicion filled every conversation. Plantation owners, who had once walked proudly through town, now locked themselves inside their mansions. Windows were closed. Curtains were drawn. Armed guards stood at gates. Food was delivered without contact. Letters were burned. Guests were refused. Wealth could buy many things, but it could not buy safety from disease. Meanwhile, poor families had nowhere to hide. Their homes were small and crowded. Sick people lay beside healthy ones. Coughing echoed through thin walls. Every night someone else began burning with fever. Every morning another house was silent. Churches closed their doors. Priests and pastors fled. Sermons stopped. Prayers were whispered privately, desperately, as if God might hear better in secret. Funerals became daily events. At first, people gathered. They cried. They held hands. They sang hymns. But as numbers grew, emotion faded. Bodies were buried quickly, sometimes without names, sometimes without family, sometimes without prayers. Death became routine. Elijah watched this transformation with growing horror. He walked through streets where laughter once lived and now found only moans and silence. He saw shopkeepers abandon their stores. He saw teachers close schools. He saw children wandering alone, confused, hungry, afraid. One afternoon he entered a cabin where an entire family lay sick on the floor. The mother was unconscious. The father was delirious. 2 children were crying weakly beside them. No one had brought them water in 2 days. Elijah knelt beside them, pouring small amounts into their mouths, wiping their faces, whispering comfort. When he left, he knew some might not survive. That knowledge haunted him. As days passed, panic grew uncontrollable. Some people fled into forests. Others boarded boats, spreading sickness further. Wagons packed with families raced away from town. Those who stayed behind were either too poor, too sick, or too brave to leave. Graveyards filled. New burial grounds were opened. Then those filled too. The smell of death lingered in the air. Doctors began falling ill. Nurses collapsed beside patients. Caregivers disappeared. Soon there were more sick people than helpers. Entire houses were left unattended. People died alone, whispering names that no one heard. Elijah realized that if nothing changed, the town would vanish. He felt powerless. He was enslaved. He had no authority, no education, no protection, but he had something else. He had courage and compassion. One night, after watching a woman die alone because everyone was too afraid to enter her house, Elijah made a decision. He sat on the steps outside his cabin and stared into darkness for hours. He thought about his mother, his father, his people, his community. He thought about how life had always taken from him. He thought about how little he owned. Then he stood up. If death was coming for everyone, he would not run. He would fight. The next morning, he entered his first infected home voluntarily. He cleaned the room. He washed the patient. He stayed. Word spread quickly. Elijah is helping the sick, people whispered. Some called him foolish. Some called him brave. Some believed he was blessed. Some believed he was cursed. But he did not stop. He moved from house to house, learning by experience. He noticed that cool cloths reduced fever, that clean water mattered, that fresh air helped breathing, that kindness gave strength. He watched carefully. He remembered everything. While others hid, he entered. While others prayed from distance, he acted. Soon people began surviving under his care. Not all, but more than before. Hope returned slowly, quietly, and in the shadow of death. One man was becoming something the town had never seen before. A true healer. When Elijah decided that fear would no longer control him, he did not make any grand announcement. He did not ask for permission. He did not wait for praise. He simply picked up his worn cloth bag, filled it with clean rags, small jars of crushed herbs and containers of water, and began walking from house to house every morning before sunrise. While others hid behind locked doors, Elijah stepped into danger willingly, knowing that every breath he took inside those sick rooms might be his last. At first, many people refused to let him enter. They shouted from behind doors, telling him to leave. Some threatened him with sticks. Some accused him of bringing the sickness. Fear had turned kindness into suspicion, but Elijah did not argue. He waited patiently outside until desperation defeated fear. When coughing grew too violent and weakness too great, doors finally opened. Inside those homes, Elijah saw things that never left his memory. Bodies twisted in pain, faces yellowed by fever, lips cracked from thirst, eyes rolling in confusion, floors stained with vomit and blood. The smell of sickness was overwhelming. Many times Elijah had to fight nausea and dizziness just to remain standing, but he forced himself to breathe slowly and focus on helping. He began by cleaning. He washed bodies covered in sweat. He changed soaked bedding. He opened windows to let in fresh air. He carried waste outside. He burned dirty cloths. He understood instinctively that filth made sickness worse, even if he did not know the science behind it. Cleanliness became his first weapon against death. Then he focused on water. Many patients were dying simply because no one was giving them enough to drink. Their bodies dried out from fever. Their tongues swelled. Their voices disappeared. Elijah brought water constantly, small sips every few minutes. Sometimes he stayed for hours just to make sure someone drank enough. He learned that water was life. He remembered the remedies his grandmother had taught him as a child. She had learned them from her elders, who had carried knowledge from Africa through generations of suffering. Roots boiled into bitter teas, leaves crushed into pastes, seeds ground into powders. None were perfect cures. But many eased pain, lowered fever, and helped bodies fight back. Elijah prepared these carefully, whispering prayers as he worked. Each day he learned more. He noticed that patients placed near open windows breathed easier, that those kept calm recovered faster. That fear made sickness worse. So he talked to them constantly. He told stories. He sang soft songs. He reminded them of their families. He promised they were not alone. His voice became medicine. At night, while others slept, Elijah walked through dark streets carrying lanterns. He checked on patients who were close to death. He cooled burning skin. He cleaned blood from mouths. He held hands as people cried. Sometimes he stayed until morning. Sometimes he stayed until someone took their last breath. When death came, Elijah did not run. He closed eyes. He whispered prayers. He carried bodies for burial. Then he returned to work. Exhaustion became his constant companion. His feet swelled, his hands cracked, his back burned. He often went days without proper food. Many nights he collapsed on the floor of his cabin without even removing his clothes. But when dawn arrived, he rose again. 'Cause people were waiting, soon something remarkable began happening. Houses Elijah visited had fewer deaths. Families under his care survived more often. Neighbors noticed. Whispers spread. If Elijah comes, you may live. Mothers begged for him. Fathers searched for him. Children cried his name. He became the town's final hope. Plantation owners who had once ignored him now sent servants to find him. Men who had whipped him now bowed their heads. Women who had never spoken to him now pleaded for help. Wealth, status, power, none mattered in front of death. Elijah treated everyone the same. Kind, patient, dedicated. No grudges. No revenge. Only service. Some nights he questioned himself. Sitting alone in darkness, hands trembling from fatigue, he wondered why he kept going. Why he risked his life for people who did not see him as equal. Why he sacrificed everything for a society that had taken everything from him. Then he remembered the faces of those he had saved. The children who smiled again. The mothers who hugged him. The elders who blessed him. That was enough. He kept going. As weeks passed, Elijah became more organized. He created simple routines. He visited the most critical patients first. He trained a few brave volunteers, both black and white, to help him clean, carry water, and prepare remedies. It was the first time many of them had worked together as equals. Death had erased old divisions. Under his guidance, they created small care centers inside empty buildings. They moved the sick away from crowded homes. They separated the worst cases. They improved airflow. They reduced infection. Without knowing it, Elijah was creating early public health systems. Doctors began observing him. At first they dismissed him. An uneducated enslaved man could not teach them anything, or so they thought. But results could not be ignored. Patients under Elijah survived more. Gradually, some doctors began copying his methods. They improved sanitation, reduced bleeding, increased hydration, focused on comfort. Death rates dropped. Slowly, steadily, hope returned. But success brought new dangers. The more Elijah worked, the more he exposed himself. He touched infected bodies daily. He breathed contaminated air. He wiped blood and vomit with bare hands. He had no protection. Coughing began. Headaches followed. Weakness grew. Still, he refused to rest. I will sleep when this ends, he told himself. One evening, while helping a dying man, Elijah suddenly felt dizzy. The room spun, his vision blurred. He collapsed beside the bed. For a moment, he thought he was dying, but he stood up and kept working. That night, fever burned through his body. He shivered. Sweat soaked his clothes. Pain pierced his skull. Yet at dawn, he rose again. Because people needed him. His body was breaking, but his spirit was unshaken. And the town was beginning to realize something extraordinary. They were being saved by a man they once considered property. By the time autumn winds began to replace the heavy summer heat, Elijah's body was no longer his own. It moved only because his spirit forced it to move. Every step felt like walking through deep water. Every breath burned. His hands trembled constantly. His vision blurred without warning. But still every morning he rose before sunrise, wrapped his worn cloth around his shoulders, picked up his bag, and walked back into houses filled with sickness and sorrow. No one noticed at first how badly he was deteriorating. People were too focused on surviving, too focused on their own pain, too focused on their own fear. They saw Elijah arrive every day and assumed he was unbreakable. They believed that because he saved others, he could never fall himself. But illness does not respect heroes. It does not recognize sacrifice. It does not reward bravery. One evening, while helping a young mother whose fever had reached terrifying heights, Elijah suddenly felt the room collapse around him. His knees buckled. His head struck the floor. The lantern beside him shattered, sending shadows dancing across the walls. The woman cried out weakly, unable to help. For the first time since the outbreak began, Elijah could not stand back up. When neighbors found him hours later, he was unconscious, his body burning hotter than anyone they had ever seen. His breathing was shallow and uneven. His lips were cracked and bleeding. His eyes fluttered without focus. The sickness he had fought for weeks had finally claimed him. Word spread through the town faster than any rumor before. Elijah is dying. People froze when they heard it. Some refused to believe it. Some broke down in tears. Some stood in silence, realizing for the first time how much their lives depended on one man. He was carried gently to a small room inside an abandoned schoolhouse that had been turned into a care center. For once, Elijah was not the caregiver. He was the patient. Doctors gathered around him, confused and frightened. They tried every treatment they knew. They bled him. They forced bitter medicines down his throat. They applied cold cloths. They prayed, but nothing seemed to work. His fever remained unstoppable. His body shook violently. His voice disappeared completely. Many believed he would not survive the night. Outside the building, people gathered quietly. White families stood beside black families, rich beside poor, masters beside former servants. No one spoke loudly. No one argued. No one cared about status anymore. They waited together, united by fear. Inside, Elijah drifted between life and death. In his fever dreams, he saw his mother again singing softly beside a fire. He saw his father walking into sunlight. He saw fields without chains. He saw children running freely. He heard voices calling his name from far away. Sometimes he reached for them. Sometimes he turned away. For days, his condition did not improve. Some nights, his breathing nearly stopped. Some mornings, he did not wake. Each time, people prepared themselves for the worst. And each time, he somehow held on. The people he had saved refused to let him die. Women took turns cooling his body. Men carried fresh water day and night. Children sat quietly beside him, whispering prayers they barely understood. Elderly men who had once doubted him now begged God for mercy on his behalf. It was the first time in the town's history that everyone worked together for one person. Weeks passed. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Elijah's fever began to weaken. His shaking softened. His breathing deepened. His skin cooled. One morning, his eyes opened. At first, he did not know where he was. He saw unfamiliar walls. He smelled medicine. He heard quiet sobbing. Then he recognized faces, and he understood. He had survived. When news spread that Elijah was awake, the town erupted with emotion. People laughed and cried openly. Some fell to their knees. Some embraced strangers. Some simply stared at the sky in disbelief. But Elijah was not the same. He was thin, fragile, weak. Walking was difficult. Speaking hurt. His body had paid a terrible price. Doctors warned that he might never fully recover, that his lungs were damaged, that his strength might never return, that his life would be shorter. Still, he did not complain. As soon as he could stand, he asked about the patients. As soon as he could walk, he returned to helping. But now people would not let him work alone. They followed his methods. They protected him. They learned from him. He had changed the town forever. By the time winter arrived, the fever had lost its grip. New infections were rare. Deaths became occasional instead of constant. Houses reopened, shops returned, children played again. Bells rang once more. The outbreak was ending. More than 300 people were alive because of Elijah's sacrifice. Officials arrived from nearby cities to investigate what had happened. They interviewed doctors, they spoke with families, they examined records. Again and again they heard the same name. Elijah. Some leaders proposed rewards. Money, land, public recognition, but slavery laws still controlled his life. He could be praised, but not freed. He could be honored, but not equal. He could be called a hero, but still owned. This contradiction haunted many. They owed their lives to a man who was denied his own. Some plantation owners privately promised to treat their workers better. Some kept their word. Many did not. Change came slowly, painfully, imperfectly. Elijah accepted everything quietly. He did not demand anything. He did not protest. He did not complain. He believed that saving lives was reward enough. But deep inside, he understood something powerful. Even in chains, a person could change history. Even without rights, a soul could leave a mark. Even without freedom, a heart could lead. And Elijah had done all three. When the fever finally disappeared from the town, it did not leave behind celebration. It left behind silence, a silence filled with memories of empty beds, abandoned homes, and names that would never again be called in the streets. People returned to their routines, reopened their shops and repaired their houses, but something inside them had changed forever. They had seen how fragile life was. They had learned how quickly comfort could vanish. And they had discovered that their survival had depended on a man they once barely noticed. Elijah slowly returned to a quieter life. His body never fully healed. His breathing remained weak. His steps were slower. His hands shook when he worked too long. The fever had taken a part of him that would never return. But his spirit remained strong. Every morning he still woke before sunrise. Every evening he still thanked God for another day. He never spoke about his suffering. He never asked for sympathy. He accepted life as it came. The town treated him differently now. People greeted him with respect. Children followed him through streets. Mothers trusted him with their babies. Elders asked for his advice. Even plantation owners lowered their voices when speaking to him. He had become something rare in a world built on cruelty. He had become untouchable. But laws were stronger than gratitude. No matter how many lives he saved, Elijah was still enslaved. He still needed permission to travel. He still worked in fields when ordered. He still lived in a small cabin. He still belonged to someone on paper. This truth troubled many. Some townspeople tried to buy his freedom. They collected money quietly. They negotiated with owners. They begged. They argued. Sometimes they succeeded. Sometimes greed won. Each attempt failed. Elijah never complained. He told them gently that freedom of the body mattered less than freedom of the soul. He had both. Years passed. Seasons changed. Children grew into adults. New families arrived. Old faces disappeared. The fever became a story told in whispers, but Elijah remained. He became known as the man who healed. When someone fell sick, they went to him first. When a child was injured, they brought him. When an old person was dying, they called him. He never turned anyone away. He taught young people what he knew. He showed them how to clean wounds, how to calm fevers, how to care for the weak, how to listen. He created healers. After the Civil War, everything changed. Chains were broken. Laws were rewritten. Freedom finally arrived. Elijah was already old when it happened. His hair had turned white. His back was bent. His lungs were weak. But when he was told he was free, he cried. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. With gratitude. For the first time in his life, he owned himself. He chose to remain in the town. Not out of fear. Out of love. It was where his story lived. He spent his final years teaching, helping, and guiding. He helped build a small school. He encouraged children to learn. He reminded them that knowledge was power, that compassion was strength, that courage was choice. When Elijah died, he did not die alone. The entire town gathered, black and white, rich and poor, young and old. They walked behind his coffin in silence. Church bells rang. Prayers were spoken. Tears were shed, but no newspapers reported it. No monuments were built. No history books recorded his name. Time moved on. Generations passed, and slowly his story faded. Until one day, long after his death, a teacher found old letters in an attic. A doctor discovered faded notes. A family uncovered diaries. Piece by piece, Elijah's story returned. Scholars began to talk. Writers began to research. People began to ask questions. Who was this man? Why was he forgotten? Why was he erased? And the answer was painful, because he was enslaved, because he was black, because history often ignores those without power. Today, when we remember heroes, we often think of generals, politicians, and billionaires. We build statues for them. We name streets after them. We teach their names in schools. But Elijah reminds us of another kind of hero, the quiet kind, the invisible kind, the kind who saves lives without expecting praise, the kind who chooses love over fear, the kind who stands up when everyone else runs. Because of him, 300 people lived. Because of him, families continued. Because of him, futures existed. Because of him, a town survived. And because of stories like this, we remember that greatness does not come from power. It comes from purpose. It does not come from wealth. It comes from sacrifice. It does not come from status. It comes from heart. Elijah had no throne, no crown, no army, no wealth, but he had courage, and that was enough.